Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. Before today's video begins, a special thank you to today's sponsor, Skillshare. If you haven't already checked out Skillshare, I would highly recommend that you do, as it has an amazing online community with thousands of brilliant classes on virtually any topic, from productivity and drawing to photography and graphic design. A class that I have enjoyed in particular is Creativity Unleashed. Discover, hone and share your voice online by Nathaniel Drew. This has helped me to think of fresh ideas and stay motivated, and to maintain quality in my work. There really is no better time to get creative and learn new skills, and I believe Skillshare is an incredible way to do so. There are no ads to worry about, and is very affordable. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial for 1 month with premium membership, so you can explore your creativity. Thank you to today's sponsor, Skillshare. For today's true crime narration, we shall be looking at the brutal murder of 78-year-old Mildred Matheny in Florida, and how, over 3 decades later, it looks as though her killer may finally be brought to justice thanks to the advancements in DNA analysis over the years. Out of all the atrocities people commit against their fellow man, the most heinous attacks involve victims with no capacity to defend themselves. Even in a society that tries to protect and advocate for the more vulnerable members of the population, there will always be predators lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect target, one with no hope of fighting back or breaking away. On the night of April the 27th, 1985, 78-year-old Mildred Matheny became one of those unfortunate targets. Mildred was born in Wilmer, Arkansas on February the 28th, 1907. She was the second oldest of Jesse and Margaret Warren's 6 children. In 1915, when Mildred was just 8 years old, her father had a heart attack and passed away at the age of just 37. His widow, Margaret, was left to raise their 6 young children on her own. As an adult, Mildred spent over 40 years working as a psychiatric nurse. She married a man by the name of Guy Harmon Matheny, and they had 1 child together, a boy who they named Gary. Gary would later go on to have children of his own, making Mildred a grandmother. Mildred was widowed at the age of 51 when her husband, Guy, passed away in 1958. Shortly afterwards, Mildred began caring for her brother, whose mental health had begun to decline. By the time Mildred was in her 70s, she was struggling with her own health, having been diagnosed with dementia. As her condition deteriorated, she needed more and more help with daily tasks, and eventually it got to the point where she was no longer able to live on her own. It was decided that Mildred would move from her home in Arkansas to live with her sister, Gladys, in Lake Worth, Florida. Similar to many dementia patients, Mildred had a tendency to wander off. She would become confused and lost in everyday situations, and often talked of going out to visit her parents, who had both died decades earlier. Because of this, she rarely went outside without someone to accompany her. However, it is near impossible to keep an eye on somebody around the clock, and on the 27th of April 1985, Mildred Matheny managed to leave the house by herself. Her sister Gladys last saw Mildred at around 3:30 p.m. that day. Less than an hour later, Gladys reported that her sister was missing to the Lake Worth Police Department. A young couple, 21-year-old Tina Martin and 28-year-old Robert Steffi, spotted Mildred at the intersection of Dixie Highway and Lucerne Avenue near a Burger King restaurant. Mildred, who was quite a frail, grey-haired woman, was dressed in her pink pyjamas with an orange blouse over the top. Concerned, the couple went to check on Mildred and spent about 15 minutes talking to her before a man parked up beside them. The man was driving a 1967 brown Oldsmobile 2-door Delta 88 Holiday Coupe. He told the young couple that he was one of Mildred's neighbours and offered to give her a ride home. Mildred got into the car and they drove away. 7 hours later, at roughly 10 p.m, Mildred was found unconscious on the side of Old Indiatown Road, a deserted road in Jupiter, Florida, approximately 25 miles from where she lived. Her clothing and dentures were found strewn around her body. She had been sexually assaulted and badly beaten. She was rushed to Martin Memorial Hospital in Stuart, Florida, in a critical condition. 11 days later, at 5:12 p.m, on the 8th of May 1985, Mildred died from her wounds. These injuries included a fractured skull and extensive internal bleeding due to blunt force trauma. The young couple were able to provide a description of the man driving the Oldsmobile. He had long blonde hair and was missing a front tooth. Additionally, the investigators were able to recover a sample of the killer's DNA. However, at that time, the technology required for analysis of such a DNA sample hadn't yet been developed. So with little more than eyewitness accounts to aid investigators, progress on the case was minimal. In May 1985, a Crime Stoppers reconstruction was filmed, but this still didn't get the police any closer to an arrest. The case quickly went cold. Mildred's sister, Gladys, and Mildred's son, Gary, feared that Mildred's killer would never be caught or punished for their crime. And this remained the case for well over 35 years. Until finally, in 2021, a break came in the search for Mildred's murderer. In the March of 2021, a detective from Palm Beach County's Cold Case Unit submitted the DNA sample from Mildred's case to the state database, and it returned a match. A man by the name of Richard Curtis Lang. Richard Lang was born on the 13th of April 1960, and he was no stranger to the criminal justice system. He had been convicted for a number of offences in the past, including 2 counts of aggravated assault and 2 possession of weapons charges. As a result of these possession convictions, he had been required to submit his DNA to Florida's offender registry. At the time of Mildred's murder, Richard was 25 years old and lived in nearby Palm Beach County. This DNA match alone wasn't enough to arrest and ultimately convict him. To confirm that they truly had their man, the police needed a DNA sample directly from the source. A warrant was obtained and Richard was tested at his home in Buffet Key, Boynton Beach. His current address was just 10 minutes away from the spot where Mildred was seen climbing into the so-called neighbour's car all of those years before. The DNA sample was tested and it was a match. Despite Richard totally denying any involvement in her death, the police now had more than enough to place him under arrest for Mildred Matheny's vicious murder. He was booked into the Palm Beach County Jail on April 22nd, 2021 and charged with the kidnapping, sexual assault and first-degree murder of the 78-year-old grandmother. He was taken to the main detention centre at Palm Beach, where he is being held without bail whilst awaiting trial. He continues to maintain his innocence. For people like Mildred's son Gary, who is now an elderly man in his late 80s, the recent advancements in forensic analysis have been a vital component to finding closure after a loved one's case runs cold. When Richard was arrested, Gary spoke of how he had given up hope of ever finding the person responsible. As the years turned to decades, he had less and less faith in the detectives. Despite their unyielding dedication and the promise that they'd get a break in the case eventually, it would have taken nothing short of a miracle, or perhaps a confession, for the investigation to pick up any momentum. And yet, 36 years later, that was exactly what happened, thanks to the efforts of people like Detective John Cogburn of Palm Beach County's Cold Case Unit, who made the decision to revisit the investigation, and also to forensic scientist Tara Sessa, who discovered the DNA match after running the sample through the database. But even though the most pressing question regarding Mildred Matheny's horrific murder may have been answered, one still remains after all this time. Why? What could possibly compel a man in his mid-20s to abduct, assault and kill a 78-year-old woman with dementia? Unfortunately, unless Richard Lang decides to speak about what occurred on April 27th, 1985, we may never really know whether it was a spur-of-the-moment impulse or part of a carefully calculated plan. But perhaps it doesn't matter. The actions, minds and motives of killers can often be difficult to grasp, if not utterly incomprehensible. After enduring 36 years of heartbreak, wondering who killed his mother, Gary Matheny reportedly admitted that he still struggles to wrap his brain around the circumstances of her death. But now that Mildred's alleged killer is behind bars at last, her son's relief in the interviews that followed was palpable. "That book is closed," he told one reporter shortly after Lang's arrest. "It's really closed." Amazing work there by the Palm Beach County's Cold Case Unit. Please add any comments down below. Thanks for listening to The Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office previously had a video about the unsolved case of Mildred Matheny. I'm pleased to say it's been updated now to show it's solved. Goodbye.